change always has an adjustment period where people just don't know how, protect themselves. And in that respect, we're in that adjustment period.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the CyberWire's Hacking Humans podcast, where each week we look behind the social engineering scams, the phishing schemes, and criminal exploits that are making headlines and taking a heavy toll on organizations around the world. I'm Dave Bittner from the CyberWire, and joining me is Joe Kerrigan from Johns Hopkins University Information Security Institute. Hello, Joe.
Hi, Dave.
We've got interesting stories to share this week, and later in the show, my conversation with Gil Friedrich from Avanan. We're going to be talking about how collaboration platforms like Microsoft Teams, Slack, and others have opened up a new gateway to ransomware attacks. So how do you train people to recognize and resist social engineering? Here are some things people think. Test them, and if they fall for a test scam, fire them. Or other people say if someone flunks the test, shame them. Instead of Employee of the Month, it's Doofus of the Day. Or maybe you pass out a gift card to the one who gets the A+ for skepticism in the face of phishing. So how about it? What do you think? Carrots or sticks? What would you do? Later in the show, we'll hear what the experts at KnowBe4 have to say. They're the sponsors of this podcast. All right, Joe, we got some good stories this week, but before we do, you've got a little tale you want to share with us today. What do you got for us?
I do, Dave. I was finally targeted by something. And I'm so happy about it.
It's a dubious distinction. All right, go on.
So actually, the way this scam started was I was flipping through my news feed on my Android phone, and there was an ad, a Google ad for Yeti coolers. Now, for international people, I don't know if Yeti sells internationally, but Yeti is this, they make incredibly good coolers. These things have really low thermal transfer rates.
Okay.
Right? They impede entropy like nobody's business.
Well, you had me at entropy, Joe.
Right. Yeah. Well, when you see the price, however,
okay,
these things are not cheap because they're really high quality. I actually have a Yeti cup, right, that will stay full of ice overnight.
Oh, wow.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
And I was looking through the ads, and this ad comes up, buy this nice big Yeti cooler for like $40. I'm like, my cup was $40.
Oh.
I this seems like a scam. So sure enough, I look at it, and the link takes me to some fake Yeti store that is run by some gobbledygook URL.
Right.
And it's just sitting there on the web. And I actually got in touch with Yeti. Unfortunately, the only way I could do it was through their customer portal. But they responded on a Saturday, which was amazing. And they said, hey, thanks for letting us know about this. This is not our site. You always go to yeti.com. Of course, I know this, right?
Yeah.
They don't know who they're talking to, of course.
Right.
Do you know who I am?
Yeah.
But the customer service rep said, we'll pass this on to our brand protection team. And by Monday, that site was gone.
Oh, wow.
So I don't know if Yeti had a hand in that or what, but the site is gone and it's not out there scamming people. And the ad is probably not running anymore either.
And the thing that tipped you off was the prices were too good to be true.
The prices were way too good to be true.
Okay.
Exactly.
All right, good. All right. Well, why don't we move right into your story then? What do you have for us?
Dave, my story this week comes from a listener named Matt, who sent this in actually as a catch of the day, but I thought it merited more than that. It's I think there's a lot of information in this, and it's more than a catch of the day. I think it's a story.
Okay.
He says back in May, he started a new position as a technology coordinator at an educational cooperative, and the job requires him to commute every day, so he's been listening to our podcast, which is great, and he's going through at about 1.5 to 1.7 speed. So maybe you and I should speak very slowly. So,
I'll share a quick aside with that. When I meet people in person, sometime if I go to a conference or something, so many people listen to this show and the CyberWire at faster than real time.
Right.
When I talk to them in person, it is not uncommon for me to have people say that I sound strange talking so slowly in my actual day-to-day speed. But I digress. Go on.
Yeah. I'm kind of a fast talker. I wonder if that makes me unintelligible at higher speeds.
Like a chipmunk.
Yeah, I don't know. Matt says there's some times he's been listening to our show and he's wondering how people could fall for things. But this morning he was going through his email and he came across the email below. And as soon as he read through it, he knew that it was a scam, but thinking for a few minutes, he started second-guessing himself. Maybe this isn't a scam, right? But it is a scam. It's a type of phishing scam. He did a little digging and found an article about it. We'll talk about that in a minute. But here is the text of the email.
Okay.
It says, "Dear CEO, it's very urgent. Please transfer this email to your CEO. If this email affects you, we are very sorry. Please ignore this email. Thanks." And that's obviously some bad English right there because they want your attention.
Right.
But then it goes on. It says, "We are a network service company, which is the domain name registration center in China. We received an application from Weihua Limited on August 23rd, 2001. They wanted to register this domain," and it's Matt's domain, "as their internet keyword and the same domain .cn, .com.cn, .net.cn, and .org.cn. So they wanted to register all these domain names that happen to have before them as whatever Matt's organization is. I'm not going to say it here on the air. These are all Chinese domain names, but after checking, we found that this domain conflicts with your company. In order to deal with this matter better, so we send you email and confirm whether this company is your distributor or business in China or not. Best regards, Mike Zhang." So this is an email that is being sent into organizations. So let's say you and I have joeanddave.com.
Right.
These guys would send an email to us going, "Pass this on to your CEO. Someone's trying to register joeanddave.cn, joeanddave.com.cn, all these other domain names."
That would get my attention.
It would get your attention, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
But there's an article here from Hinshaw Law that talks about guarding against Chinese domain email scams. And this is what this is. So these guys are trying to essentially elicit some kind of fee out of you by sending you an email saying that somebody's going to register the domain in China as your company.
But for the low price of whatever, either we'll register for it first or we'll keep this from happening, I suppose. I'm guessing.
Exactly. That's right.
Right. Wow. Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. And I would give this a second look.
Yeah.
As our listener did.
Yeah, it's absolutely something that I can see people getting taken in by, especially if you're worried about like brand protection.
Yeah.
And your name, like in our earlier Yeti story anecdote that I had. Truth be known, this may not even be coming out of China.
Yeah,
right?
It's possible.
It
sure.
could be coming out of some third-party country, or it could just be some other scam. But I don't know where it's coming from.
Yeah.
And I didn't do the research on the email headers, and Matt didn't actually send those along, so I couldn't get the opportunity to do it. But it's an interesting story, and I just wanted to pass it on to our listeners because it is a scam, and it is something that, as you and I have both said, would get our attention.
Yeah, I dealt with something like, I dealt with the real world version of this years ago, over a decade ago, where a previous company I was with, we had the .com registered here in the United States.
Right.
And we had a trademark on the company name and all that sort of stuff, all the stuff you do here to properly register your company name. And someone in the UK spun up a company with the same name.
Really?
And they had the .uk address.
Yeah, .co.uk.
And they were in the same sort of business that we were in, which the domain name lent itself to. And it was a sort of a sticky situation where you say, well, is there anything I can do about this?
What was the resolution?
Didn't do anything about it. There really wasn't, it wasn't worth... they weren't coming after our customers or anything like that. They were an ocean away.
Right.
So mostly it was a nuisance.
Yeah. But how long ago was that? Decades?
Probably about 15 years.
Yeah. International business is much different than it is now.
That's true.
It's changed a lot, I should say.
Yeah, that's true.
I stumble over my words here.
And I suppose the first step would have been to send them a nasty gram, but what are you going to do with an international thing like that? The long arm of the law doesn't necessarily reach across the Atlantic in a case like this.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah, interesting. But I guess the reason I tell that story is that, that got my attention.
Right.
and this would get my attention as well. So I think the broken English is a red flag here.
Although in this case, it does make sense that it would be broken English, right? Because
it does.
It's under the auspices of coming from a Chinese source.
Right.
So this is somebody for whom there's a great chance that English is not their first language.
Yeah, that's true. All right. Well, thanks to our listener for sending that in. That is an interesting story here. We'll have a link to that article that describes this scam in the show notes.
From Hinshaw Law.
Yeah. My story this week comes from the folks over at Protocol, and it's an article written by Biz Carson, and it's titled, "The FBI's Warning to Silicon Valley. China and Russia are trying to turn your employees into spies." And this is an interesting article about, a risk that particularly companies in tech deal with because they have a lot of folks who work for them who are from overseas. So,
right.
The United States is a destination, as you well know, being at Hopkins.
Right.
The United States is a destination for people from all over the world to come to get a good education. And a lot of those people stay.
Right.
And they seek out jobs here, and they're fine employees.
Right.
And so companies, the tech companies, they are in demand because they tend to be well-educated, good workers, have good incentive to be here, and all those kinds of things.
Additionally, we have a shortage of tech workers here in this country, and we even have a visa called the H-1B visa, which lets us bring in tech workers if we can't from foreign soil. They can get a visa to come work for us.
Right. So this article points out that the FBI is on top of this because they have had incidences where China, for example, and we'll just use China as our example here, but there are other nations who do this as well. They contact folks who are working here and try to influence them to become spies for their homeland. And an interesting part of the article here, they say there are 4 main vulnerabilities that they look out for. Someone being a citizen of an autocracy, China in this case, doing business with one, having assets in the country, or having family members or employees living or working in the autocracy. But they say that it's the family vulnerability in particular that they see exploited over and over again.
Right.
And I think that's the part that really resonates with this show and our listeners is if you can use the influence of your family members back home, boy, that is a powerful influence over people.
Absolutely.
And particularly when you're dealing with something like an autocracy where they could say, listen, if you do what we want you to do here, good things will happen for your family.
Right.
And if you don't do what we want you to do, maybe bad things will happen to your family. Right. They say that, it's not HR's job to assume that everyone is a spy.
Right.
And they're really overt here as saying that there is a hazard here that you don't want people to have anti-Chinese or anti-Russian resentment. We don't want to be looking at everyone who's from a different country and saying, ooh, they're probably spies. That doesn't do us any good either. And we don't want any prejudiced against these ethnic groups just because of a fear of this.
Right.
But it is something, at the same time, it is something to keep an eye on. It's a concern. It's something that the FBI is concerned about. And if you have a concern, something to alert the FBI about if you think perhaps there's something that's going on. Every organization should have things in place to protect against having data exfiltrated, for example, making sure that stuff isn't going overseas. But I don't know. I guess part of the issue I'm having with this is how do you balance the fact that this sort of thing is going on with the fact that you don't want to, out of hand, just put a target on your Chinese or Russian employees, who may very well, most likely are very up and up good people who aren't spying for their countries. So do you put extra vigilance in place when it comes to those people, or do you put broad systems for everyone?
I think you could put broad systems for everyone. I don't think it's right to target people based on their country of origin. I mean, we actually have laws against that in this country.
Right.
But I'm not an expert in employee law, so I don't know what the implications are. But there is something else that we should be aware of, and that is that these are not the only folks out there who are subjected to this kind of risk, or who manifest this kind of risk, rather. Just because they have family in an autocracy doesn't mean that somebody who was born and raised in America isn't hasn't been compromised by another competitor or something like that.
Right, yeah.
So it's wise to have some kind of data loss prevention system, or I don't know what that would look like, but if I was going to do that, I wouldn't just do it on my employees who were citizens of these countries or who had family back in these countries. I'd be doing it for everybody because there's more than just that risk.
Yeah. Yeah. And the FBI points out in this article, one of the folks from the FBI says, so much of this is not just people who steal because they want to steal technology. A very, very large chunk of it is normal human beings who do not want to steal, who are just trying to protect their families and have to steal in order to protect their families.
Yeah.
And that's sort of a sad truth of this, I suppose.
It is. It's a terribly sad truth.
Yeah. Yeah. So interesting article. There's a lot more details to that. We'll have a link to that from Protocol. As I said, we'll have a link to that in the show notes. All right, Joe, it's time to move on to our catch of the day.
Dave, our catch of the day comes from a listener named Iain, and he sent us this tiny little gem. The subject line is, "Hello from Afghanistan." And it comes from a Gmail address. You want to go ahead and read this one?
Sure. Attention, Sir Ma. I want to bring to your attention a sensitive, confidential business proposal. My name is Salah Mohammed, a resident of Afghanistan whose country was currently taken over by the leadership of the Taliban after President Ashraf Ghani managed to escape the rebel forces. The embattled Afghan President Ashraf Ghani fed the country on helicopter full of cash. You can read the details in this link. Consequently, senior customs officer discovered about $30 million in cash, which was part of the money left behind at the presidential wing of the airport, and the funds have been moved diplomatically through Pakistan to the United Arab Emirates. Presently, we are looking for a reliable person who can further receive the funds before the Taliban government commences investigation on the funds. The funds are secured for now, hence our decision to further move the funds to your country through you. And for your cooperation in this venture, we will give you 15% of the total amount that will be moved through you to your country. Upon your acceptance of this proposal, further details will be given to you. Thank you. Yours sincerely, Salah Mohammed.
So these guys have taken advantage of a news story where the Afghan president did flee the country in vehicles full of cash.
Right. As you do.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they're trying to capitalize. Oh, look, he had so much money. He left behind $30 million.
Right.
And you can get away with, what's 15%? I should be able to do this math in my head.
It's a lot. Doesn't matter. It's a lot
of money.
It's real money, Joe.
Yeah, it's more than $1 million or $3 million.
Yeah.
It's $4.5 million, Dave. There I just did it in my head.
Say it's what you get for being at Hopkins, right? Just those brainiacs rub off on you, don't
That's
they,
right.
Joe? Yeah.
They do.
All right. Well, it's a good catch of the day, and we appreciate our listener for sending that in. We would love to hear from you. If you have a catch of the day, you can send it to hackinghumans@thecyberwire.com. So let's return to our sponsor, KnowBefore's question: carrots or sticks? Stu Showerman, KnowBefore's CEO, is definitely a carrot man. You train people, he argues, in order to build a healthy security culture, and sticks don't do that. Approach your people like the grown-ups they are, and they'll respond. Learning how to see through social engineering can be as much fun as learning how a conjuring trick works. You can hear more of Stu's perspectives in KnowBefore's weekly Cyber Heist News. We read it, and we think you'll find it valuable too. Sign up for Cyber Heist News at knowbefore.com/news. That's KNOWBE4.com/news. All right, Joe, I recently had the pleasure of speaking with Gil Friedrich. He's from a company called Avanan. And we were discussing how some bad actors are taking advantage of some of the common messaging apps that organizations use to communicate internally to fraudulently make their way in and to do the things they want to do. Here's my conversation with Gil Friedrich.
We always ask ourselves the question of, why now? Why this proliferation of attacks. You watch CNN or you read the New York Times, and all of a sudden cybercrime gets headlines. I want to say almost every day, definitely every week. So definitely COVID accelerated digitization. People are more vulnerable. I think people are also home, so maybe a little off guard. But then the key thing is, as you mentioned, we just use those new platforms more. We don't know how to protect ourselves. Email, still a huge problem, but I think people have their email training, etc. But Teams, it was just introduced to enterprise, and the question of how to protect it is still very, very new. So I think that's part of it. The change always has an adjustment period where people just don't know how, protect themselves, and in that respect, we're in that adjustment period.
How much of this is, when you think about the platforms like Microsoft Teams, like Slack, some of these collaboration tools, I think for a lot of folks, they think to themselves, well, this is something that was provided to me by my work. So it must have been vetted. It must be secure. There must be things that are going on behind the scenes that make sure that keep me out of trouble. Do you think that's part of the mindset that's problematic here?
I think it's part of it. There's an assumption that, unlike email, where anyone on the planet can send an email to any one of your employees, those platforms are a little more closed. So it's by invite, even if it's outside of your organization. There's some previous, vetting of whoever can communicate with your team. So people put more trust in it. And then we really see that with behavior of users. There's also an assumption that it's not actually monitored by the organization. So I think employees know that their employer, archives, tracks every email they send. They behave in Teams as if they're, chatting on WhatsApp with their friends. Very loose, sending anything, even sensitive information, trusting anything, assuming there's no attack on it. So that's part of it. There's that assumption and the lack of education that, hey, this might be phishing or might be similar to phishing, from email. Don't trust everything you read.
What are you and your colleagues seeing in terms of people taking advantage of these platforms? How are the bad actors getting into them and doing the things they want to do?
So most commonly, and this is because when you think about Microsoft 365, it's one account to all their apps. The initial break-in will be done through email, and then the spreading will be done through another platform. It could be Teams, it could be OneDrive or SharePoint. And by doing this, hackers are able to bypass everything done for email security, but they're also able to propagate through a platform that just has more trust by the recipient.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, so come in via email and then spread in Teams. That's something we see pretty commonly done by hackers.
Yeah, it's sort of a vulnerability that I hadn't really considered. I mean, it makes total sense that, if you're using so many of these different tools within the platform and it's all, the keys to all of them come through your email address, that could be a pretty broad spectrum of vulnerability, be it whether it's Microsoft Teams. I mean, I suspect you have the same thing over on the Google side.
True. Yeah, it could be Google Drive for sure. We have statistics that I think about 3% of links to Google Drive in organizations were actually malicious. So, just by itself, the fact it's a link to a Google Drive by itself was an indicator for our AI to say, something's phishing here, pay attention.
So what are your recommendations for folks to protect themselves against this? Is it the standard digital hygiene type things, or are there any specific things people should have awareness of?
Excellent question. So I think always in these attacks, at a high level, there are two layers to think about. One of them is, the platform, the machines, whatever you can do automatically. And the other one is the human. And I think the very first step for organization is to acknowledge that, they open the line of communication. They need to spend some time answering the question of, what's the threat? What kind of configuration am I going to allow? Am I going to allow, just internal organization communication, or am I going to open it with the outside, etc.? Once they figure out the configuration that is right to them, then comes the question of what tools am I going to use? Am I going to use something that's going to scan and make sure there's no malware, there's no phishing links, there's no account takeover, etc.? And at the same time, am I going to train my users? We used a cartoon a while back where it was basically someone on the phone saying, "What? To email this to you? I'll get fired. Let me Slack it to you." So to basically, it's almost always enough to tell the employee, "Listen, this is an enterprise environment. We're monitoring this. For better or worse, if you see something, say something." Those kind of things that just tell them, it's not the Wild West. You need to protect yourself, and we'll help you. But you, the user, you're also a layer of security here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that the users bear a sense of responsibility, the same way that if they, that they have to, keep strangers from walking in the front door of the building, right?
Exactly. And they are well aware that, not every link is a link, and not every email that looks like it came from the CFO is the CFO. They just need that level of awareness when it comes to other lines of communication.
All right, Joe, what do you think?
Very interesting stuff, Dave. COVID definitely accelerated our movement to these other messaging apps, but it was going to happen eventually. We were going to be, I was already actually into Slack, and we already had Teams set up, although I hadn't used them nearly as much as I have here. And actually what I've used the most is Zoom, not really Slack. I think my Slack usage is probably around the same. I'm not really a big fan of Slack. Maybe it's just because I haven't been using it as much as I like. But I'm just not a big fan. I'd rather talk to somebody than sit there and type to them. There is a change with an adjustment period, but we've had a lot of changes in such a short time. And I think that's really a big part of the issue, right? Like we were going, if we were going to be more organic in our changing, it would have been slower. We would have gone from a rollout from just email to Slack maybe over a couple of years. But no, we didn't do that. We went into that new environment in like a month, right? And I think that is a big part of the issue. So these platforms, we tend to think of them as a little more closed, and there is this assumption of security. So a phishing email that harvests credentials, and those credentials are then used to access, let's say, Teams, because Gil was exactly right. If I can break into somebody's Microsoft 365 account, I don't have access to just their email. I have access to all their files. I have access to their Teams accounts, so I can send messages as them. Once you're in there, but there's still the assumption of security, right? Still the assumption that this person is the real person I'm talking to, because like he said, everybody assumes it's vetted. It all starts with an email that can be sent by anybody. This is why email still stinks, right? It's the only service in the world where anybody can send you something. I think it's interesting that 3% of the Google Drive links are malicious. I think that's stunning. That's a lot. I mean, if 3% of the files on your computer were malicious, you'd be terrified. And he talks about two layers, the tech and the people, and he really views users as a layer of security, and that's great. I think that's a good way to look at it. I often say, if I was CISO or security awareness, whatever person in a company, that would be the first thing I'd tell everybody is, you're all part of my security team now. If you see something, say something, and I expect that you guys are going to notice these things when they come in. I'm also expecting that sometimes you're going to fall for it, and that's okay. Just, don't be afraid. Don't be embarrassed. Let's just get it fixed.
Yeah. Not long after Gil and I had this conversation, I noticed on our own Slack channel at the Cyberwire, one of my colleagues popped up with a second identification, like a different version of the same person than I was used to seeing.
Huh.
And it caught my attention, and I reached out to this person on their original account, a private message, and said, I just want to check to make sure this is you, And the person responded and said, yes, that was me. I accidentally logged in using a different device and so on and so forth. It was just it was an error on my part, and thank you for checking. Right? So, I don't mean to toot my own horn here or anything, but having had the conversation with Gil, I think put me in that frame of mind to be extra vigilant about this sort of thing. And I'm glad I was. Turned out to be nothing, but it was better that I asked than not. So I'd say to everybody out there, it's that old, if you see something, say something thing.
That's right. And that's why we do this podcast, isn't it, Dave?
That's right. All right. Well, our thanks to Gil Friedrich from Avanan for joining us. We do appreciate him taking the time. And we want to thank our sponsors, KnowBe4. They are the social engineering experts and the pioneers of new school security awareness training. Be sure to take advantage of their free phishing test, which you can find at knowbe4.com/fishtest. Think of KnowBe4 for your security training. That is our show. We want to thank all of you for listening, and we want to thank the Johns Hopkins University Information Security Institute for their participation. You can learn more at isi.jhu.edu. The Hacking Humans podcast is proudly produced in Maryland at the startup studios of Data Tribe, where they're co-building the next generation of cybersecurity teams and technologies. Our senior producer is Jennifer Iben. Our executive editor is Peter Kilpie. I'm Dave Bittner.
And I'm Joe Kerrigan.
Thanks for listening.